What's up, knife freaks, sharpness geeks, and purveyors of stabby goodness? Welcome to the Knife Freak Show. My name is Jonathan McNeese, joined by my co-host, Mr. Chase Boatwright.
Greetings, sir. How are you on this fine day?
I am good. It's a little rainy and stormy outside right now, but that's all right. It's we needed it, and hopefully it's going to cool things off a little bit.
I think you're like a...
What about you?
I don't know. I think you got superpowers or something. You said it's rainy outside, and about the time you said that, it started raining here. So you got some sort of voodoo magic.
Well, there you go.
Otherwise, I am
Yep.
good. I've been doing home chores. I've put in a light fixture in the bathroom. So, yeah, doing great.
Nice.
What about you?
All right, cool. Yeah, pretty much the same. Few chores around the house, some stuff outside. Got some stuff cleaned up at our pond that's down behind the house. Had to clear out the road down there, and let's say I did that last weekend, I guess. And this weekend I did some weed eating or brush whacking down there, I guess. With those things. Have you ever seen those saw blades that are made for weed eaters? That are like They make different kinds, but the ones that have like chainsaw teeth on them, those things are awesome. Like those things are freaking great.
They look awesome, but they also look a little bit terrifying. But yeah,
you got to mind your P's and Q's, but could definitely do some damage. But you can, when one of those is, and you can sharpen them like a regular, if you got a chainsaw file, you can sharpen them like a chainsaw chain, and it. Yeah, but a good freshly sharpened blade or whatever, and you can take out probably a 3-inch, 2.5 to 3-inch pine tree in like one swipe. They're pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I sort of did something similar yesterday too. I got my father-in-law has like a walk behind bush hog thing, and I plowed through all sorts of brush and stuff around the house. But anyway, this is not the homestead improvement show or whatever. I'm not Tim the Toolman Taylor, but
that's all good though. The guys, they need to know. I mean, that's all these kind of things. One of the things I've always kind of prided myself in is that, I actually do activities, I actually live a life. I mean, sometimes it feels like all I do is shop stuff, stuff related to building the knives, but I actually do stuff too, where I'm actually out, using knives in the real world and stuff like that. Because inevitably, anytime you're out doing something like that, you end up needing a knife for something. So, because I did throw in a little fishing
100%.
after the weed eating or whatever. So once I got some of the brush around the edge of the pond cleared back, I did a little fishing while I was there. So of course, needed a knife for that. So
nice.
So yeah, like doing the outdoor stuff. But anyway, sure. How's the week in the shop been?
Pretty good. Been working on mostly fixed blades again this week. Got 4 almost ready. I don't know I think I mentioned it last time, but I'm doing that little show at Mark's Outdoors here. It's in Birmingham, Alabama, for those of you that are close. But it's July 18th and 19th, I think. And so working on some stuff for that, and mostly just enjoying not working on folders at the moment, although I have still been working on folders a little bit. So I can't help myself. I see it over there needing to be done, and I'm, it's not that bad to sit at the mill for a minute when it's, 98 degrees in the shop or whatever, and I'm pouring sweat and grinding a blade or, shaping my car to handles in a dusty, sweaty environment like that. It's not always the funnest thing. So, you go over to the mill and, mill some stuff down or, mill lock relief, whatever, that's not that bad. Little chance to sit in front of a fan
give you
a few minutes.
Little breather in between there.
Yeah, it's a working break is kind of how I look at it. It's like I'm still working, but this needs to be done, but I can sit here and do it. It's not that difficult. So y'all had a good week.
We had a pretty good week. So we're working on. I guess that was just this week that we did the first skeletonized Mac 2 3.5. Yep. That was kind of almost
I meant to ask you about that.
It was kind of a spur of the moment thing, honestly. Like I've thought about doing it for a while, and like people have asked us about it. I just never really never really got the itch to actually do it. But we were, so where we're at with our stuff. So we got in as we were transitioning to the Dixons, we got in our last batch of very delayed last of our batch of Mac 2 3.5 blades that were off to be ground. That whole
Yeah.
very delayed thing is one of the reasons that we're now grinding blades in house. So, point of that is now we've got a decent handful of Mac 2 blades that we got back, and I really want to transition to doing those grinds in house as soon as possible. So we're going to try to kind of, my intention was to switch over completely to the Dixons for a while, and we probably still kind of
Yeah.
are, but I was really wanting to use up all the Mac 2 parts that we already had, blades at least, so that when we started back on them, it would be a clean break and we'd be doing the new grinds on them. I'm not sure that that's going to actually work out. I think we're going to have to switch to the Dixons for a while, and then when we switch back to the Mac 2s, we'll probably have to use that time to finish up the blades that we've got first and
Yeah.
then transition to the new grinds. So, but anyway, but we are still, we're trying to get on schedule with the Dixons, which means, so we're trying to get the timing down so that we have the material getting the water jet, before he runs out so that he stays stocked, and then the water jet supplying us with parts before we run out, and then keeping them, all the steps that we do in the shop, getting them ground, getting them on the mill, getting them processed, getting them finished, and turn them into, actual builds. Trying to get all of that lined up so that we're in a steady flow of doing X number per day and keeping X number per week coming to us from the water jet, and, X number of material coming from the material suppliers to the water jet
Yep.
monthly or whatever. So really trying to kind of get a system in place where everything just flows and stays on schedule. And it's taken us, you can't just, because one step depends on another. So you can't
Yeah.
just do it all at once. You know what I mean? Like you can't just say, okay, from this point forward, because you have to wait on the water jet, and then we get the other stuff done. Then we have, I skipped the whole heat treat step in there, getting like on
Yeah.
blades, getting them in here, doing the milling and stuff on them, sending them off to heat treat, getting in a cycle of getting them back every couple of weeks. So we're sending blades out to heat treat every week, so that
Yep.
within, probably by this coming week, we should be on a schedule of getting blades back from heat treat every 2 weeks. Well, every week. It takes about 2 weeks to do them, but we've sent enough batches now that we should start getting in a batch every week. So anyway,
Oh, that's good.
we're
Yeah. That
we've
whole
we've had
rigmarole of
some,
like keeping the flow going is a very difficult thing
yes,
to do, because
it's a huge balancing act.
one process goes slower than you expect it to or faster than you expect it to, and then there's a hitch in the giddy up, there's a kink in the chain, and the whole thing starts,
Yep.
it snowballs from there. So it's a very difficult
Yep.
balance to kind of get all that straightened
It
out. And I'm
is.
sure it will never
And
be
that's,
perfect. I'm sure you could ask the
yeah,
biggest companies in the world and they still have issues like that, I'm sure, but like
I'm
it's all
sure.
about trying to make it better. So
Right. Yeah, we're trying to streamline it as much as possible and kind of automate it as much as possible. But the yeah, that's been honestly one of our biggest challenges over the last year, or honestly since we've been doing this.
yeah, I was about to
And
say, since
just,
I've been there, that's
yeah,
since way back when I started, that was always sort of a thing, is trying to figure out, you
yep.
know, when
And
to order, how
we've,
much to order, you know,
yep. Because
when
it's
to
not
send
like we
this,
have
when to
unlimited
run it.
resources either, where we can just order,
Yeah.
tons and tons and tons at a time. We're getting where we order
Hmm.
bigger and bigger amounts of stuff, but it's still, you, you could think, well, just buy a whole bunch at one time and then make sure you don't run out. Well, yeah, but you got to have the cash flow to do that. So that
Hmm.
it's
I mean,
it's
you
it can
spend a
make it
whole
a little
bunch on
tough.
hardware, and yeah, you spend a whole bunch on
Yep.
hardware, and then you're not able to, get enough titanium cut, or, send enough
Right.
blades to heat treat for all that hardware or whatever, because that money's tied up and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got to balance it all
The
out.
things I do not envy.
It's kind of like doing your household budget. Like you've got to figure out
Yeah.
how much of each thing you can afford to get at one time, and then balance all that out and try to keep things flowing. And
Yep.
honestly, that whole process is one of the reasons that we've kept moving more and more stuff in the house, because we run into bottlenecks, and so we basically then just decide, okay, we just got to bring this process in house so that we can eliminate the bottleneck, or at least for the most part. And it's worked pretty well. We're
Yeah.
down to only having the couple of things that are not in house now. So, and hopefully we can keep that way, but we'll see. But anyway, the whole point of all that though is that we've had a little bit of a lag on getting into rhythm on schedule with the Dixons. So we've been building some Dixons, some Mac 2s, and that's where the skeletonized one came in. We needed to build, so the guys were like, what do you want us to, on the mill? Like, what do you want me to run? And I was like, you know what? Here, let me do this real quick. And so I went in and whipped up the program for it, and it took us, we did a couple of single ones. Took us a couple of tries to get it the way we wanted it, and then we were off and running with it. So it actually went surprisingly well. But it wasn't that bad, since we basically took the weight reduction pockets that were already in there and just essentially made them go all the way through, and then added, put a chamfer on both sides. So it's not like I had to come up with a complete whole pattern or whatever. It was already there. I just had to pretty much change the programming. Didn't really have to model anything up different. Just change the programming to have it cut the pocket completely out and then chamfer it. So
nice.
So anyway,
that was a cool thing to see. That is one good thing, I guess, to finish this segment off. Like, when you do have those lull periods, you can kind of, sometimes that does inspire a little bit of, creation or, something like that, something a little different to come out of it. So I guess that's, positive aspect of trying to find the rhythm. Sometimes you find
absolutely. It can definitely push some of your creativity.
Yeah. All right.
So I believe we had a little bit of news, didn't we?
Yeah. I found an article, or I believe I was sent an email from Blade Magazine about this article called "Knife Steel After Crucible Industries," and sort of going back to covering that whole thing that we covered a lot at the beginning of this podcast, like where Crucible is now owned by Aristeel, which is I saw something on here. I thought it was a French company, but apparently it's owned by another person or another company that's like in Sweden, I think. But anyway,
yeah, I believe that's right.
Crucible is no longer a United States company. They were bought out by Aristeel, and basically the whole article was talking about how Niagara is going to be sort of filling in as much as they can for the Crucible loss, especially in terms of like the names, all of the trademarks like CPM MagnaCut, CPM S35VN, like those are trademarked names. There are other, maybe not necessarily those steels, but like 20CV and M390 are basically the exact same thing. But M390 is a trademark held by Bowler. 20CV is a trademark that was held by Crucible, but now Aristeel. But, those are like proper, I guess that's like Corvette and Mustang, sort of, essentially.
Yeah.
So basically, the article was talking about how Niagara will be able to use a lot of those names for the CPM steels, given the conditions of buying from Aristeel and, going through their particular process. But the good thing is that a lot of those names will not be changing, except there is a couple of exceptions. In CPM crew wear will now be known as NSM wear, so Niagara Specialty Metals wear. And then S90V will be NSM 90PM. So those two are technically changing. I could see some makers out there still calling it S90V or crew wear. Depends on, and they're not necessarily lying, or I don't know, I don't think that would be intentionally misleading, but those are the new names offered from Niagara. Crewwear will be offered by another distributor, is what the article says, exclusively under the name Crewwear. So that'll still be out there. But anyway, so yeah, really good article about and it also goes into the steel tariffs. It goes into, all the different things about what Niagara's doing up there, talking about their new steel called Magnamax. Also, uh, like developed by Laren Thomas. So I'm guessing sort of in the MagnaCut series. I don't know much about that steel particularly, but I hadn't really read up on it. But yeah, just a really good article that I thought I would share and, kind of go through and I guess update everybody that has been around since the beginning when we were talking about all that.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
very interesting, and it's going to be it's going to get a little weird, and with some
yeah,
of the naming stuff or whatever, and you got to think that this stuff, there's still supplies of this stuff floating around. I mean,
mm-hmm.
we've still got a supply of the original MagnaCut, that hasn't been started being made over there yet or whatever. So, you're not going to see necessarily an immediate shift to different names and stuff because people still have some supplies of the old stuff out there. But yeah, it's going to get a little weird just seeing the name changes and also like for us, trying to keep everything as made in the US as possible. It's already challenging. It's about to get a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
So I'm honestly not sure. I'm really looking forward to the Magnamax and seeing what all the details are on it and how much of the process. Because I'm not sure if it's going to be a powdered steel or not. If it is, then my
I
understanding
believe
is
it
they
was,
can't do.
yeah, I believe
Go
it
ahead.
had a CPM prefix.
It did. Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in the article, I
All
think.
right.
Can't find it at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah. If so, then my understanding is that the only place that has that there's basically nowhere anymore in the U.S. I guess since Crucible, went out of business. There's nowhere else here that has the um, setup to do the actual powder, the atomizing of the steel to do that process. So at the very least, some of the process will be done somewhere else. It sounds like for that steel, and so it's gonna get interesting. But I will say this for us, it's I would much prefer to buy a steel that's ideally 100% made, sourced, made everything in the U.S. Problem is I'm not sure that that's going to be anything that you can find, at least not in the higher grade steels like people are expecting to see in folders. So, but I
Yeah.
also think there's a huge difference in you know, buying steel from a company, especially because some of the stuff I know there's steels that, some of the work is done and then Niagara gets it and like rolls it and processes it and stuff in their plant up there. So like, you know, there's a big difference to me in buying steel from that part of the process or even all the process was done in somewhere like Germany or Sweden or something like that versus just straight up outsourcing your stuff to China. Like
Yeah.
that's just two different ball games. You can try to go down that rabbit hole and you know try to justify that because not everything is 100% absolutely every little bit of iron ore and everything else that was mined, that everything came 100% from the U.S. You know that if it's not that, then well, you might as well just have your stuff outsourced to China. Like I think that's a huge leap. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
nuance in between there.
That's a
So
very big stretch. I mean,
yeah,
if I was a woodworker and I got a piece of wood from, the jungles, the Amazon in Brazil, and it was just a piece of wood when it arrived to me, and I turned it into a, beautiful table or something, I don't think anybody can make the argument that that table was made in Brazil. You know,
exactly. That's
like
a great analogy. Yeah,
like
exactly.
just
I
to
mean, you're
kind of
getting
dumb it all down. Like, I mean, we're
yeah,
not talking about like, we try to buy as much as we can, like you said, as far as the raw materials and stuff in the U.S. as well, but we're making a product in the United States.
yeah. But taking it taking it from a raw sheet of titanium, especially like I said, some of the stuff I don't know, I don't guess all of it, but I know some of the stuff is being processed, rolled out and processed and stuff like that by Niagara once the initial stuff is done anyway. So like it's yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's there's no, unfortunately, like I said, I wish we could have just a solid, you know, solid breaking point of like, okay, here's a steel over here that's 100% everything about it is made in the U.S. I would love to be able to have that. That's absolutely what I would want to use. But unfortunately, it looks like that's not much of an option right now. Maybe with some of the push to bring manufacturing back, and I've seen, while the cutlery industry is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what the steel industry worries about, I've seen stuff about the steel industry in general, kind of, even though we're talking about Crucible doing the exact opposite, but that was in the works for, I think, quite a while, months and months, that's been kind of on the horizon, that they were going to end up going out of business. So it's not because of any kind of recent developments, but I have seen other steel companies and stuff talking about reinvesting and back into manufacturing more back in the U.S. and stuff. So maybe we'll end up with some better options before it's all said and done.
Hopefully so. I mean, that's all we can really, as us as just the consumer end, for this particular industry. Like, I mean, that's all we can really do is hope for the best,
Yep,
really.
we're kind of at their mercy a little bit. So, and it's like everything else, guys. Like, I always want to try to do as much as possible. I want there to be better options, because, like, for example, if I go to buy a computer, what's the chances I'm going to go find a computer that's made in the U.S.? Like, especially when
Yeah,
it's 100% made in the U.S. I'm not a computer expert, but I'd be willing to bet the chances is totally zero that I could find a computer that's 100% made in the U.S. Same thing
yeah,
with almost all electronics and a whole lot of other stuff. And what I don't want to see happen is for that to be the case with the knife industry, because that's,
yeah,
that didn't just happen overnight with these other industries either. It started slowly being chipped away at until everybody was just getting their stuff made somewhere else, and you can't get it made here
yep,
anymore. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of the reasons
yeah.
that I
I
fight
mean,
so
that's
hard for the American made stuff in the knife industry in particular, is because I don't want to see that happen to the knife industry. And when you look back over
yeah,
those of you that have been around long enough, like, you look back 10, 12 years, and the knife industry looks completely different than it did 10 or 12 years ago. So if it's changed that much in essentially a decade, like, it worries me to think about what another decade or a couple more decades is going to look like, as far as, it staying alive, and the American knife cutlery industry leading the way. I don't know.
yeah,
It's scary for me to think about that we could go the way of electronics and everything else, and then all the major manufacturing in our industry would be outsourced. So
yeah. I mean,
anyway,
that's like you said, it's not a overnight thing, but I mean, it's a slow process of, like, okay, some people start to do it and it becomes acceptable into the market, and it becomes, gains momentum, and more people
yep,
start doing it, and all of a sudden it's, instead of doing it the hard way, why would we do that? Let's do the easy way and make more money. And so
and
yeah,
that's exactly
it
what's
is.
happened over the last 10 to 12 years. In our industry, I mean, if you look at it, it went
Yep.
from being basically totally unacceptable, like, nobody was going to be, you basically get laughed out of the, you know show or whatever if you showed up with a bunch of stuff that you had made in China. And now it's not only is it commonplace, but it's arguably, you know I wouldn't say it's the majority, but it's
It's
definitely it's definitely gotten a very strong foothold. So
oh yeah, yeah,
it's
for sure.
and
It's
what was that?
a scary time. Like, it's a scary
Yeah,
time, and it's like a weird time, especially for, like, a lot of the younger makers, a lot of people that are younger than me and my age and stuff. Like, we've kind of, I guess, sort of, grown up in that. And there's some like me that haven't gone that route, and there's others that, sort of jumped on board right away. And I'm friends with them either way. Like, they're, the ones I'm friends with are still good people, but, like, it's sort of a weird thing to kind of try to
yeah,
navigate that whole social circle aspect, because they'll, I've had people ask me, like, hey, why don't you, do this? Like, I know a guy, like, I can put you in contact with him. And I'm like, nah, that's not for me.
yeah,
Just straight up. So, but
yeah.
beyond
And
that,
just
did you
for
have anything else to
since
add to
we
the article.
Yeah, while I'm thinking about it, I want to add one more thing in on that while we're down that rabbit hole. Let's go ahead and
Yeah.
poke the rabbit bear. Um, so another thing, so I had somebody that was in the uh, OEM space as far as like doing OEM work, like they're an American shop doing OEM work, wherever, and they were talking to me about people were wanting to get stuff done, and it was people I guess that had already gotten stuff done like in China, and they came to them wanting to build it, and basically they weren't willing to do it unless they could make like a 300% margin on it. And this guy, of course, was like, I literally, there's no way I can build it that cheap. Like the price they were needing him to build it for, so they could make a 300% margin was like, I mean, he would have gone in the hole just buying the materials. You know what I mean? Like there's absolutely no way, not just a matter of him making a little less profit. Like he was literally would have gone in the hole probably just buying the materials. And so
Yeah.
that if a 300, which, and from what I understand, that's, I've heard that number thrown out a couple of other times too. So if you're looking at people that are having stuff made in China, and I don't know that every single one that this is the case, but if that's kind of like the standard is 300% margin, then do you know how insulting it is to see in some of these talks about knockoffs and stuff? I've literally seen people talking about how the companies are getting knocked off. If they weren't so greedy and charging so much for their knives, that maybe people wouldn't be buying knockoffs or whatever. I am at nowhere near a 300% margin on my knives, guys. Like
Yeah.
nowhere near it. I can promise you. So you might want to rethink who you're calling greedy when you look at this whole scenario, because those of us that are doing it the way we're doing it, I can guarantee you that anybody that's making their stuff in the U.S., they are not. I mean, unless they're riding some kind of really good, hype train and they've got their prices kind of, elevated because their stuff's super popular right now or whatever, maybe they might be close to that number. But I can guarantee you that most of the people that are like me and around the price point that we're at, we're not making anywhere near a 300% margin. So to call us greedy while the other people that are having stuff made there to, and making a 300% margin off of it, that just blows my mind. Like it just, the seeing how skewed people's outlook is on this stuff. Like it's the,
If
people
only people
just do
knew,
not understand.
like, if people knew how much, like, these guys that are getting OEM folders are paying for the folders, I mean,
Right.
I, and then turning around and selling them for $400, $500, like, even $300, like,
Yeah. Well, a
yeah,
lot of the prices have crept up now to where they're within like $100 of, people like
yeah,
us. So
yeah,
like, but yet theirs has probably a 300% margin on it, and ours has got, not even a, fraction of that. So
yeah,
yeah, but we're the greedy ones, and we deserve to get our intellectual property ripped off because we're so greedy, because we're charging so much for our knives. Like it's just, that's highly frustrating to hear that.
yeah, for sure.
So that just something to keep in mind, guys. And I don't know exactly how much these people are paying for their knives. Like I said, that's not the first time I've heard that 300% margin thrown out. So just keep that stuff in mind when you're looking at where you spend your money, and when, especially before you run around calling somebody greedy. Not that I think anybody
Yeah,
that's listening to this probably would do that, but just when you see other people doing it, just keep that in mind. It's the people that are doing it the hard way. I guarantee you, it's not a greed factor. If it was a greed factor, we'd all be doing it much easier way with much higher profit margins. Like I could
oh,
be,
yeah,
Lord, I could have made so much more money by now if I was doing it that way. And I know, to some people from a business aspect, that sounds stupid that I haven't done it, but like, it's just, yeah, it makes it highly
as
frustrating when
with,
people accuse us of being the greedy ones.
yeah, I
But
mean, as with everything, there's trade-offs, and like in building a knife, there's trade-offs in how you run business and where you maximize profits and where you minimize profits in a
right,
very real way. you know Purposefully minimalizing profits is definitely a thing, uh, for wouldn't say secondary goal, but a different minded goal than just maximizing profits.
yeah,
But anyway, Um,
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm
beyond
not
all
against
that,
making a profit. Just,
oh yeah,
but like, but to do it ethically and,
yeah,
like
that was
it
sort of what I
just,
was trying to say, I guess.
right.
Sorry guys if y'all hear a bunch of rumbling and rambling. My dog is under my table that I'm recording on, and she's terrified because it's storming outside.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
Mine's doing it. Mine's the exact same thing. I'm kind of awkward sitting here because I can't put my feet under my desk because he's down there hovered up under me. But also apologize if we have
Yeah,
some
well,
little
she
delays or
can't sit
weirdness on
still.
this episode, guys. Yeah, if we have some delays or if I'm like talking over Chase a little more than normal, I'm having a really hard time hearing him today because the ambient noise because I'm in a metal building and it's raining, and my hearing's not great anyway. So I'm kind of I've got the speaker over here. I'm like leaning in as close to it as I can to try to hear him. So I apologize if if it's a little awkward today, but we're trying to get it done in spite of the weather. So anyway, all right. So I
Indeed.
think we had one question we wanted to hit, maybe.
Yes, we had a question that was not necessarily attributed to anybody. It was more just one that I had kind of floating around, and I've heard it asked on a lot of other podcasts and stuff. Was do you have any advice for a new maker? And do you want to lead off on that?
Lots. Yeah, but this may end up actually
We
being
could give them the
almost a
Tom Mayo
whole a
advice.
whole episode.
Yeah,
What's that?
that was actually sort of where I had this listed in my notes. Was in the like episode ideas, but for now, I figured it would
Yeah,
be a sort of good primer for what we've got coming next.
yeah. Because it was something we kind of wanted to mention today, and this kind of leads into it. But yeah, we may end up going back, maybe even next week, and doing maybe a full episode on this. We'll see because there's a lot of different things we could talk about on that. So,
Yeah,
do you
for
want to
sure.
start off?
Yeah, sure. And I guess one of the biggest things I would say as far as like new maker advice, assuming you're already kind of up and running and making stuff, you're already a maker, not necessarily like trying to figure out how to get in. My biggest thing would be to listen to what people don't say. Like if people are like, "Oh, I really like your handles. Oh, I really like your blade shapes or whatever," but if no one ever mentions the grinds, if no one ever mentions the finish, if no one ever mentions a bunch of these other things, I would say try to listen to what people don't say. um, is one of the biggest things.
Read between the lines.
Yeah, for sure. I believe I heard that
Yeah,
from Todd
that
Gray.
kind of goes back to what we said last week about people, not if you don't know have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. That may be a case where people are practicing that, and the nice things they're saying to you, yeah, don't get too hung up on the praise that you're missing the fact that that they're not technically criticizing you, but maybe they're leaving you some clues as to places that you need some work. So that's a good point.
Definitely. Yeah, you have to be your worst critic, and it's I know I definitely am. I don't know if I've
Yeah,
been happy with a knife I've made yet. Like, I'll be happy with
right.
it for about 5 minutes, and then I'll see everything wrong with it. So,
Yeah, yep. So on
you
that
got
note
any
too, I
nuggets
think
of wisdom?
well, yeah. Well, like I said, we're not going to try to get into every part of it since there was kind of something specific I wanted to talk about. But I will say on the note of what you just said, also having some thick skin, um, and and learning where to have thick skin, but not so thick that you like ignore anything negative that people say. Like you can't write
Yeah,
off everything negative that people says as that person is just being a jerk. Okay, sometimes that may be the case. There are going to be people that are literally going to say stuff just to try to piss you off or just to try to, get attention or whatever. Their mama didn't bring them their hot pocket quick enough that earlier that day in the basement, and so they've got to lash out at somebody, something like that. But a
we need
lot
a
of the
hot pocket
time,
shirt.
we may have to do a hot pocket shirt. It seems to be a recurring theme on here.
Yeah,
So, uh,
yeah,
yeah. So, you know, people they may not always say it in the most tactful way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. All right. So even now, I still people will, when people criticize stuff, I try to look at it. First I go through like some phases. First I'm just pissed off and like, you know, anyway, we'll leave it at that. I'm pissed off. And then, and then I have to stop and think, okay, well, is there some validity to it? Like, is that actual something that needs to be improved on or whatever? And sometimes it's yes. And there's been many things that I've improved because of people's criticism or whatever. But so have thick skin and know that you're going to get criticism, but also don't just dismiss it just because it is criticism, because a lot of criticism is actually beneficial. It's not all just people being jerks. So you've got to be prepared for that. And just, do not let your ego get in the way, because it will want to. That's where those phases of it, come in. Like initially my ego gets bruised and I'm like, in knee jerk reactions to get pissed off. Then I have to calm down a little bit, stop and think about it, get my ego out of the way a little bit and decide, is this a legitimate complaint? And a lot of times too, it's just an opinion. You know what I mean? Like, it's like yes, I could do this different and that person may like it, but I don't like it that way. And maybe the majority of people don't like it that way. Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, sometimes it's not that neither one of you are wrong. Maybe the way you're doing it's not technically wrong, and the person's criticism is not technically wrong. It's just that their criticism is how they would like it better, and it's not necessarily right or wrong. You see what I mean? So it's like, and you have to decide what you like better, but also what the majority of people like better, because when it comes down to it, you're probably not planning on keeping all your knives yourself. So, you need to be in tune with what the customers want as well. So, just because somebody has a criticism and that could be considered correct doesn't necessarily mean, that there's some things that are kind of cut and dried. Knife doesn't need to be dull. It doesn't need to have hot spots. There's certain lock doesn't need to fail. Like, but there's also a whole lot of nuance. It's just a matter of opinion.
You don't necessarily, you need to have a little backbone behind some of your,
Right.
expertise or your design cues or your, your ethos that you're bringing
a reason
to the
why
knife.
you're doing it
need
a
to have a
certain
little
way.
bit of backbone with that. And then also
you don't want to be too wishy-washy
and incorporate it into your own style.
Right. You'll never be able to settle on a way to do stuff if you wishy-wash back everything that people say, because you'll get opinions this way, you'll change that, and then somebody will complain about it and want the exact opposite, and then you'll never be able to settle on something if you're too wishy-washy. So you need to figure out, again, you need to weigh it in, and is it a legitimate point? And if it is, do I need to, is it something I want to change, or is it, do I like it better this way and the majority of my customers like it better this way? I can see where they're coming from, but, I just prefer it this way and other people prefer it this way, whatever. So yeah, don't let your ego get in the way, but also don't, have reasons and, like you said, kind of a backbone as to why you're doing things a certain way too. So, but not so grounded in it that you're not willing to listen to other opinions. So
definitely.
Yeah.
But so I believe with that about becoming a new maker and getting into an industry or getting into a certain thing, you kind of had some thoughts and some ideas about paying your dues.
Yep, for sure. Paying your dues. So I feel like this is not, just beware, like old guy rant coming on here, because it's certainly not true of everybody. And like you're a lot younger than me, and so you're a good example of proof that not everybody is this way. But I feel like a lot of younger people, and it's not exactly their fault, it's our fault, the older people that are my age or so and older, that let culture turn into people getting 17th place trophies and everybody's a winner no matter what, and like, you deserve to be equal to everybody else no matter what, no matter what you do, whether you put in the work that they put in or not, you should still get considered equal as them. Like that has harmed our culture greatly, and I see it in our industry, and not just our industry but just in general, like people and that, and again, told you it's an old guy rant. The internet is another big part of it, and the culture that has developed around the internet to include, online shopping, Amazon, next day, 2-day delivery, stuff like that. People do not understand delayed gratification anymore. People think that they're entitled to have what they want right now as soon as they want it, and if not, then they're going to throw a hissy fit, or they're going to take a shortcut, or whatever. Guys, that's just not the way it works. I mean, it's just not in the long term of things being. Very rarely do you do something impulsive and it turn out to be the best thing. Most of the best things in life come with some delayed gratification. Like, for example, it would be very gratifying for me to go eat a big old piece of chocolate cake and wash it down with some milk and maybe a couple of cookies to go with it. And God dang, I'm getting hungry. I got to stop talking about that. But I would prefer to be healthy and to look decent. And so that is a delayed gratification. I could have the gratification right now of eating the big pile of desserts. And in the moment, it would be nice. But in the long run, I would pay for it with my health and the way I look. And so having delayed, and there's no shortcut around that. You can't have both. I mean, you can, you could maybe eat a little bite of the cake and whatever, and one nibble of a cookie and get a little bit of instant gratification, and then still get your delayed gratification. So there's a little bit of, balance there, but for the most part, you can't have it both ways. You can't literally have your cake and eat it too. Like you can't have your cake and your 6-pack too. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And it's that way with a lot of things. Like you can't be a top paid expert in your field the second you walk out of college, unless you're just some kind of like mega genius or something. Like, and even if you are, you still probably lack the experience to be a top paid person in your field. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're the smartest person that's ever come through that college program, you still don't have the experience to max out your salary the minute you walk out of the college, So like, there's a lot to be said.
If you did, sorry, I was going to say, like, there's
No,
nowhere to go with that either. Like, if you start at the top, there's nowhere to go. Like, it's,
right.
But
It's just not, it's just not the way it works. Like, it's natural law. Like, it's not, you have to put in some time to get there. I mean, most people are not super wise when they're in their, teens and 20s. Like, you have to have some life experience typically to get wise. Some people are lucky and they have somebody that's a good mentor that can help them, shave some time off of that if they're smart enough to listen to them. But you still have to get the experience. And so when it comes into the knife world, I think that for sure, there's so many people, and it goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier too about the outsourcing stuff. It's not just that. It just so happens that the outsourcing stuff has made it easier. Just like the internet and Amazon has made it super easy. We're all spoiled now, myself included. We're all spoiled to be able to get stuff and get it quick, right? We get something and it's supposed to be 2-day shipping and it takes 3 days, and we're pissed off because it's been so long, that, it's taking us forever to get this thing. It's been 3 days. I mean, come on, like we look at it completely different. So, it's definitely changed the way we look at things. And so people being able to outsource, having knives made has definitely pushed that along in the knife industry, because now people basically, all they have to do is draw something up. It doesn't even really matter if it's good or not. Like, you draw something up, it doesn't even matter if it actually functions or not. You don't even have to have paid your dues enough to know the actual mechanics of how to make the knife work properly as far as all the design features. And you can still have a knife made and put it out there and promote yourself as a knife company. So now, are you in business, and are you, technically a knife company? Yeah, I guess you are. But do you have the same kind of knowledge and the same kind of everything? And probably, are you going to have the same kind of longevity as somebody that has paid their dues and knows all the ins and outs and isn't totally dependent on somebody else to do all the heavy lifting on it and that kind of stuff? You know what I mean? You're kind of setting yourself up for a flash in the pan kind of thing if you don't pay your dues typically. And I feel like that's true of almost anything, our industry and everything else in life. You know, if you don't
Yeah.
pay your dues,
I
you're
mean, I
more
think it's
likely to
skin
be
in the
like a
game.
flash in
I
the
mean,
pan.
it's
Yeah, right. They also have a tendency, I think that most people, that's a good point that you made about having skin in the game, because I feel like people that have a skin in the game are more likely to care more about the industry and want to do things that are beneficial to the industry as a whole versus just get theirs. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying that there's not people out there that care and try to do the right thing by the industry, you know, that are, you know, maybe haven't paid their dues based on the criteria that we're kind of talking about here. And two, like when I say pay your dues, that doesn't mean you've got to make knives for 20 years before you know, come out and show a knife in public. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing wrong with, you know, getting started and getting after it. And honestly, the other thing that I think that people are really selling themselves short on when they don't, when I say pay your dues, I'm talking about, you know, designing a knife, learning how to make the knife. Not that you have to actually physically be able to make a knife to design a good knife or to have a knife company. Like you don't necessarily have to do that. But I do think it gives you a big advantage if you do know how to actually
yeah.
make them. And one of the things that you get an advantage is like, I know for me and my design language has changed drastically over the years in a lot of ways. And it's mostly due to trial and error. It's because I paid my dues, because I've put stuff out there. I've gotten customer feedback on it. You know, I've put in enough time to also be able to look back at some of my earlier work and see things that now, you know, I look at with a different set of eyes because of the experience that I've had in the meantime. You know, it just, you're kind of robbing yourself of a lot of learning there if you just jump straight into it and like somebody else is making, you know, you're literally just doing a line drawing on paper, or maybe you have enough skills to do a, you know, a 3D model of it or whatever, but you've never actually, you know, put metal to the grinder or whatever. Like I just feel like you're leaving yourself
Steel to the wheel.
steel to the wheel. You're losing a lot of knowledge that you could gain. You know, I mean, yes, you can put out iterations of a knife. So you could design a knife, have it made, put it out there, get feedback on it, revise it, do it again. But you're talking about, I mean, all of these people that are doing that, OEMs, it's all in batches, right? You're not doing like one or two knives and putting them out there and getting feedback on it and changing them. You're putting out, you know, probably a minimum of 250, 500 knives at a time. You know, I don't know what their minimums are, honestly, but I would guess probably
Yep.
at least 200, 250
Uh,
for most of these small run stuff that's
yeah.
OEM. And so it's, you're not being able to like get the feedback on putting out, you know, I built this one of this model folder, I put it out there, the person got it, and before I get the next one built, I'm already getting feedback on that one. So then the next one, we've talked about multiple times how stuff evolves, you know, sometimes on the fly as you're making something. Like you got your pattern, you're changing it, you know, you find something you don't like about it, on the next one you're literally changing it kind of just on the fly. So you're getting a lot faster
Mm-hmm.
feedback loop and being able to make changes and make adjustments a lot quicker instead of having to wait until you can raise the money to, you know, on your next pre-sale to get your next batch of knives done or whatever, and then you get them in. I don't feel like people are as prone to get feedback, make changes, and adjust as they are if you're kind of like making them one at a time. You know what I mean? Versus having a batch made at a time. You get a lot quicker feedback loop, and you're learning a lot with that. I mean, think about it. A lot of learning is feedback. You get in that feedback loop, and you're trying to, you know, you're learning from your mistakes. You're learning from the feedback we talked about, from the criticism we talked about earlier. You're learning from that. You know, you're being able to make adjustments a lot sooner rather than having to wait until you do your whole next big batch of knives, you know, that get shipped in to you, and then get them in and be like, oh, well, I wish I'd have done this different or whatever. Now you've got to wait till the whole next batch before you make another change. I see that as a disadvantage for people that are doing that they're not getting the feedback, and they're not being able to grow as a designer, you know, and since If they're just
Yeah.
designing and not making, then wouldn't call them a maker. But
Yeah. I
you
mean,
see what I'm
even,
saying? Like,
yeah, even every time I send a design to WaterJet, I get the blanks in and I am immediately unhappy with them.
yeah,
100% of the time I have sent stuff to get WaterJet, I get the parts back and there is something I am not happy with out of the box. I'm all
right,
excited. I've got parts now. I've got things that are going to make my life easier. And I open the box and I'm pissed at myself immediately because
yeah,
there's something I overlooked. There's something I missed. There's something I
yeah,
didn't do right. And so it's like, in one way, that makes me sort of constantly sort of trip over myself. But in another way, I mean, like I don't ever, that change, that thing that's wrong never sticks around for any length of time.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
it's how
so
you
like
learn. It's how you learn and how you develop
yeah,
by making mistakes. If you've got somebody, if there's something going on with your design and whoever's making it for you is making the changes, or whatever, and they may be making the changes just to make the thing work right, and you don't even really know what they did, then like, how are you ever growing as a designer
yeah,
or whatever? Like, and then what happens if if you decide that you do want to make the stuff yourself one day, or you, which is one of the reasons that I think it's so hard for people to, once they start down that road, to ever transition back to doing it a different way. You know what I mean? Like, you're so used to having somebody else do it for you, you're not necessarily, learning from the mistakes that you would, getting that almost instant feedback from, making a knife, putting it out there, making a knife, putting it out there. Like, I feel like that's a big
yeah,
disadvantage for people in the long run of being able to, you know, grow as a designer and maybe become something more than just somebody that draws up designs and sends them out to have them made. And what happens if that pipeline gets shut down? We've seen all the geopolitical stuff going on right now. What if all of a sudden, or tariffs make it, to where it doesn't make sense, that you basically can't afford to have them done there, or they shut it down completely and you can't have it done there? Well, do you still have a company? Like, because can you transition and do something different? Can you do it yourself? So like, you're putting yourself, in my opinion, in a disadvantage by not paying your dues and actually learning the ins and outs of what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, and the same can be true of any industry. Like, I just, you know,
yeah,
I don't want somebody that doesn't know the mechanics and stuff and doesn't understand all the mechanics of a car, like, designing my car. You know what I mean? Like, I
yeah.
want
If you can't
I
change the
want
oil,
somebody that,
or
huh?
yeah, like if you can't change the oil on your car, or like that Tundra you had, they put the damn
Yeah,
starter behind the exhaust manifold. Like, no, don't do that.
right.
Like, do you
Yeah,
not understand that this makes this job infinitely harder due to your placement of this part? Like, it does not go
right.
together. You do not understand how this works, and
Yeah. I think some
that
of that's a classic
frustrates me
disconnect between some of
to
the
no end when I
engineers
work
and
on
the,
cars.
yeah. So
Well, I
I don't
think
know. Like,
it's part. I think it's part that, and I think it's part making it difficult for the consumer to work on it intentionally. But that's
yeah, yeah,
I digress.
yeah. And auto industry, yeah, that may be some of it with that industry, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. Same
Yeah,
thing with building a house, whatever. Like, I don't want, well, and for example, I don't, and it's a little bit different. I guess it just kind of depends on how you look at it and what business model you want to have, because like, an architect is not the one building a house. And if you ask anybody that builds houses, most of the time they have to change stuff that the architect has on the blueprints. Like, it doesn't usually work
yeah,
exactly the way the architect has it laid out, because in real life, everything doesn't go the same way it goes on paper. Um, and there's things that they overlook because they're not the ones out there doing the stuff. So it's kind of the same thing. It's just, I feel like it's a disservice to the person, the maker, the whoever that's doing the thing, and it's a disservice to like your customers and stuff if you're not willing to pay your dues, and you're just so ready to be, the next cool knife maker or whatever, that you just jump right in and like, hey, I've got a knife design, and hey, so and so's making it, and here you go. Like, just, you know I don't know. I just, again, maybe some of this is
You
just
want to
old
be
guy
the.
stuff, but I feel like there's
I
a
mean,
lot to be said about paying your dues.
yeah, there's definitely some of that instant gratification of, oh look, hey, I've got a booth at Blade and I'm the cool guy and a bunch of people want to come and talk to me and like all that.
Yeah.
I think that definitely goes on, especially for people that are in the industry as consumers and then try to make that transition into having a company and
Yeah.
have stuff built overseas or have stuff OEM'd and whatever. Like there's definitely, I think, an aspect of social currency in that as far as,
Just,
both on social media and in person and stuff.
it almost becomes like a popularity contest. Like everybody wants to be the, you know, like you said, the cool guy. But the problem is they want to have the cool guy side of it, all the glamour that you see of being behind the booth at Blade Show without going through all the headache of what it takes to get to that point. It's
Yeah.
just, and like I said, you could say this about a lot of different things besides just our industry. I think that our society as a whole is doing itself a disservice by, you know, people not being willing to pay their dues. Now, I get it that we live in a lot faster world than we used to. A lot more information is readily available. You know, there's a lot of opportunity that was not there before, right? So you can learn stuff at a lot faster rate. So when I say pay your dues, I'm not necessarily saying that you got to, make knives by hand for 20 years before you decide to do a production folder. And I'll be honest with you guys, looking back, like I was too much to the paying your dues side of this than I should have been, because I I looking back, I wish I had started doing the production route several years sooner than I did, which would put us probably several years ahead of where we're at right now. But I didn't have the confidence for one thing, and I felt like I had to pay my dues and I had to have a decent amount of time in the industry and have my name built up and everything before I just dove into doing production level stuff. Like I wanted to
Well, I think that's
kind
also
of
a
build
product.
up organically. Go ahead. What were
Sorry,
you saying?
I think that's sort of a product of the time you sort of came up in as well, like where you were
Yeah,
coming up
which is
in
for
USN
sure.
and you know all the other guys that were doing the bigger stuff and so.
Well, yeah, and because the other wasn't
Sorry,
really
guys,
an
I think we're
option
lagging a bit.
as far as doing the OEM stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, you didn't have guys that you've never heard of that happen to be, you know, in some Facebook group or just popular on Instagram or whatever, that all of a sudden, you know, or a reviewer or whatever, and then all of a sudden they've got a knife brand like that. That didn't happen, like, not to my knowledge anyway.
Yeah,
But I also felt like I needed to, build my way up and to build it like organically so that I had enough of a following for my work that kind of warranted going into a production level versus jumping right into a production level and then trying to get the audience to like, hey, here's my production stuff. You see what I'm saying? Like, let it grow to the point where like more,
yeah,
you can't make enough stuff to service all the customers that want your stuff. So then you go to the next level and you go to production stuff and you start doing production stuff to try to meet the demand versus just jumping straight into production
yeah.
stuff and here's hundreds or thousands of knives and then trying to find the customers or whatever, like. So but to be fair, I did lean probably too much to the other side of it. I probably should have made the leap at least 5 years sooner than I did. I just you know I didn't. I felt like I needed to pay my dues and didn't really have the confidence, I guess, to do it because it was a whole new learning curve that I'm still learning. But so the one point I do want to make though too is that don't make the mistake of thinking that we're talking about like gatekeeping, all right? Because it's a whole different thing. There, I can promise you, there is very little, if any, gatekeeping in the knife community. Because if you're trying to learn how to do stuff, people like nearly everybody out there will openly and freely give you information and show you how to do stuff and tell you how to do stuff. Like it's still, I've been doing this for 17 years and it still blows me away when I go, even like the Blaze Show this past, I mean, this year, people that have been in the industry way longer than me that have got kind of, proprietary type things systems that they've figured out, and they're freely giving me information on them. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's been that way the whole time. And I try to do the same thing. I try to be free with giving out information. So I think the knife industry is probably the last place that anybody could accuse of there being gatekeeping as far as information on how to do stuff and get started and do things. Like, there is plentiful information out there. Like, I mean, and it's been that way the whole time I've been in it. Like, people would gladly tell you, but a lot of people, especially the people like me, what they don't like is people that want to be spoon fed. All right. What I don't appreciate is when somebody wants to come and ask a question or be shown how to do something, and they've put zero effort into figuring out how to do it themselves to start with. They've done no research on it. They've done no, you know what I mean? I wouldn't feel right going to somebody that's, going to a Rick Kinderer or somebody that's, years ahead of me and being like, hey, how did you do so-and-so, knowing that I haven't even, like, I'm just totally trying to piggyback off what he's done without trying to figure it out myself ahead of time, or at least gain some level of knowledge on it. You know what I mean? Like, to just totally, there's a difference between asking for help and just wanting to be spoon fed everything. And in my experience, the people that want to be spoon fed, they're not going to do crap anyway. If they don't have enough interest in it and enough gumption to actually be trying to figure it out and actually do stuff, then whether you give them the information or not, they're really not going to do anything with it, which is why it aggravates me, because I know if I give them the information, it's a waste of my time, But if somebody's got a problem, they're stuck, they're whatever, they have some information on it, but they just can't quite put everything together, more than happy. And I feel like, I mean, you're a good example of that. I mean, we're sitting here because
yeah, definitely.
You asked, and here we are, so it's, I just,
I mean,
I can
but I
already
didn't walk
see
into your
people
shop and say,
saying that
"Hey, teach me everything you know."
right. You went about it the right way, and you already had a lot of knowledge. You'd already been trying to do some stuff yourself. You just hadn't quite connected some of the dots, and honestly, some of it too was just, in your case, was just needed a little push, like to you're one of those that falls more on the planning side, and wanting to you almost know everything before you do, versus know enough to get started and figure the rest out as you go. So you need a little bit of knowledge and a push, but a lot of people just, like I said, all they want to do is just basically, they want you to spoon feed them the information. They're not going to do anything with it anyway, because if they haven't put any effort into it to that point, then they're not going to do anything. And so that's a little frustrating. But whole point of all that is, because I can already hear the argument to my thing about paying your dues being that, people shouldn't be gatekeeping. Well, if you've had any experience in the knife industry at all, unless you're just coming at people like a total jerk or something, then I can guarantee you that nobody is gatekeeping, other than maybe a very few examples here and there. Like, it's unbelievable the amount of information that's shared in the knife industry. I guarantee you, people in almost any other industry wouldn't believe it if you told them how open our industry is with sharing knowledge.
I had that experience with that earlier this week, talking to a listener of the podcast. Actually, he's a drummer, and he interacts a lot with custom drum builders, and he was talking about, like, that community, seemingly, from what he said, can be very toxic and sort of shark infested waters sort of thing, where people don't necessarily get along like that. And I'm like, I don't know how I deal with that. Like,
Polar opposite.
Like, I mean, most of the people I talk to on a daily basis are other makers, and I ask them questions, they ask me questions, we just talk about stuff. I mean, it's free and open, and there's only been one or two occasions where I've asked somebody something, and it was a very specific pointed thing about, like, a very unique part of their process, and they were like, well, don't really want to give that up, but you're on the right track, is basically what
Right.
and it
Yeah.
wasn't like
There are occasionally
anything.
little things. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't anything major. It was about a particular finish or a particular way to do a, type of handle or something like that. And like but it was everything else I've ever asked those individuals have been, well above board.
Right. And there may be occasion like somebody's got a specific finish that's kind of proprietary to them or whatever. Like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, kind of wanting to protect some of your intellectual property a little bit if it's like something specific to what you do and you don't necessarily want everybody else replicating what you do. I mean, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. But as far as like how to make a knife in general, like
Yeah.
you could be literally flooded with information, like you could go, you could probably go on Instagram right now and have, answers back within 24 hours from multiple people that are, with years of experience just by going and asking. I mean, it's just, no, I don't think anybody could ever accuse in general the knife community of there being a problem with gatekeeping, because I if there is, I've never seen it in 17 years. Like you said, other than maybe a couple of random individuals that just happens to be the way they are, or like I said, very specific processes that you probably shouldn't be asking them about anyway. If it's if it's kind of their thing and you're wanting to replicate it, then
Yeah.
maybe
And
it's
that was probably ignorance on my part, not realizing that, like, that's unique
their
to
thing,
them. I probably shouldn't ask that. And that was back in, sort of earlier days. So, younger,
right?
naiver type of days. But, yeah,
But they handled
I
it
mean, if there's,
gracefully. Sounds like
yeah, for sure. And like, talked to him a few weeks ago at Blade Show, and perfectly cordial, happy, all good.
yeah,
But
probably happy
yeah,
to see you doing well.
yeah, I'm happy to see them doing well as well. So I mean,
Yep.
it's all love and butterflies and rainbows here.
Yeah. Well, and also think about. Tell me this: like, what other industry have you seen where you see that many people? Like, it's totally common. Maybe not at the show as much, but it is totally common to like watch people's videos and stuff and see like other makers wearing like other makers shirts or gear,
Yeah,
merch and stuff. Like it's totally like everybody is like super supportive of of their buddies and stuff like that. Like
I have
it's a
seen.
fantastic industry when it comes to you know sharing and
Yeah,
having good attitudes toward each other and all that. So
yeah,
it
I have
just
seen a little bit of that sort of essence, I guess, creeping into like uh, maker communities in general, where like a bunch of different makers will share a common space and like these modern things that they do, and like
right.
sharing and helping information and doing stuff like that, and maker communities sort of getting better in just like in ceramics and in other stuff like that.
Yeah,
So I think
makers
it's
in general. Yeah,
sort of making a comeback, or sort of like getting out there into other
yeah.
places a little bit, but I've never seen it, I
That's
think, on the level
well,
of.
that makes me, when you said that, that makes me kind of think that I think there's probably something to that. The fact that because makers know what goes into what you do, like, and they can appreciate what other people do. You're not just in business like selling a product, like you're creating a product, which goes back to what I was saying about the people that are paying their dues and actually makers versus sellers.
Yeah,
um like true makers actually making the product themselves. Like, I think that just lends itself to a different kind of mindset, a different kind of appreciation for what other people do, versus somebody that's not doing as much of the creative process and the actual making process. I think it just probably breeds a whole different kind of mindset with makers in general. I think
yeah,
can like
I agree.
I can appreciate, like, I see stuff, like I love watching people do like ceramics, like pottery and stuff. I love watching glass blowing and stuff like that. Like, I think makers
Yeah,
in general tend to appreciate other makers of all different genres, you know, probably more than the average person does, just because
yeah,
they're just kind of wired that way, but also because they know what goes into reaching that level and kind of honing their craft and stuff. So anyway,
because they've paid
um,
their dues and they understand what goes into that.
exactly, and it's like a mutual. It's kind of like like how really some of the strongest bonds that can be made are made through adversity. When people go through adversity together, it tends to give
Yep.
them a really strong bond. And so maybe they didn't technically go through it together, but makers know the adversity that other makers have gone through to reach the point that they're at. And so I think that kind of gives them a somewhat of a bond, even though they may not have literally been doing it side by side. They have an understanding of the adversity that they've gone through. So that actually,
Oh, yeah.
I think we've rambled about this enough that we've kind of gotten down to some of the core of why, you
Yeah.
know,
I
why I
mean,
feel
you look
like
over and
paying
like
your
you're
dues is
like,
important.
yeah, you talk to them and you're like, oh, you've burned your fingerprints off of your thumb a million times too. You've
Right.
cut your hands
Yeah.
a million times. You've had the sore hands and the sore forearms from doing all the stuff, and you've
Yeah.
breathed the grit and the dust and had it all over you in the hot summer sweat, and you've gone through the
Yeah.
fire, and now we're out on the other
Well,
side, and
sometimes literally.
well, we're still in it, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's fire, but yeah,
Yeah.
it gives you
Shop
that
vacs
level
catching
of
on fire,
respect, and
slinging
like
them
you were
out in the
saying for
yard so they
other.
don't catch the whole shop on fire. Yeah.
That was a
To
fun day.
to kind of put a
Yeah,
bow on this real
yeah.
quick, because we're
Anyway,
starting to run a little long. I think I knew I was going to ramble about this subject a good
yeah,
bit, partly because let me just say I don't want to make it seem like that there's some big barrier to entry that like people can't get started or can't do this. Anybody can do this. The information's out there. It's like it's totally doable. You can get into it. It's not that expensive to get into it, especially not if you do it like I did. Like I've told the story before, so we won't go back into it. But like anybody can do it, and I'm absolutely not discouraging anybody from doing it. What I'm encouraging you to do is to pay your dues so that you truly learn and you truly understand and you truly get that maker spirit that we were just talking about. Like you will set yourself up with a much stronger foundation to do what you want to do with this if you actually pay your dues. I'm not saying you've got to work in the dark for 20 years before you try to do something else, but a reasonable amount of paying your dues I think is not too much to ask for somebody to build something worthwhile. So the last part of that I'd like to mention is there's a little bit of that. So from the collector's end of it, I feel like there's a little bit of a dues to be paid as well. Like it takes some time to be in this industry and like learn all the information, learn what to look for, and most of you have done that. And most of us have started off with $50 knives, $100 knives, $200 knives, and worked our way up, kind of paid our dues, building our collection, spending more money each time, learning the different things, buying stuff maybe that you end up not happy with, and learning your lesson from that, and also building relationships, because like it or not, like there's times when having a good relationship with a maker or whatever ends up paying off, and you get a chance at something that maybe somebody else didn't get a chance at or whatever. Like it or not, in any industry and anything in the world, that's the way it goes. So there's a certain amount to be said for putting in the time, paying your dues as a collector, learning, making friends, making connections, developing relationships and stuff that can not only maybe help you build your collection, but also make your collection mean a whole lot more. Because you think about something a knife that you got from somebody that you built a relationship with for the last 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years, that's going to mean a lot more to you than just a knife, the cool looking knife from some random dude that you don't even know. You know what I mean? So I feel like we could probably talk a good bit more about that, but I think there's a certain amount of dues to be paid as a collector and stuff as well. Thinking that you're going to jump into the collecting game and you're starting to, immediately going to have all the coolest high end stuff, and get every drop and all that is just probably not reasonable. So there's just a certain amount of, and
it's
that's what
sort of
makes it
empty
worthwhile.
too.
If you could if you could just jump in
Yeah,
immediately and buy everything you wanted right when you want it, well, how long would you even want to do it? Not long. Most people wouldn't. You'd burn
yeah,
out really quick. So
yeah. I mean, it definitely would. It would feel a little empty to me. I think like we've mentioned 100 times on here, It's the people, it's the relationships, it's those sort of things. Like, one of the collectors that's been with me since the beginning, he sent me a slip joint that I still own and love. Like, it's a random German made slip joint, but like, he knew I
Yeah.
liked it and we had talked about it, and he sent me one. And like, just those little things make me admire that knife that much more, I think.
Yep. That's right. Well, we um, probably talked this out a pretty good bit. We may hit it some more on the future episode, but I think we've got some meat left on the bone to talk about all these topics a little bit more. But probably need to wrap it up here for today. So we greatly appreciate you guys. Please make sure that you subscribe, give us a like, please comment. We really appreciate the feedback. Hit us up with some questions. Chase is going to give you the email address before he signs us off here. So please keep supporting us. We appreciate you guys very much, and hope you have a great week.
Yep. And that email address is knifefreakshow@gmail.com with one S, knifefreakshow@gmail.com. Catch us on Instagram, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you find these things. And like he said, comment. And we're running a little low on questions, so feel free. Please send us your questions. I'm probably going to post a question box later this week on Instagram. But with that, let your freak flag fly.